All right, let's get going. So welcome everybody. This is not room 7 at the Phinney Neighborhood Center, where we are accustomed to holding the Holiday Bookfest. But we still consider this the 11th year of the Holiday Bookfest, the first being hosted from my son's bedroom. I'm Tom Nisley, the owner of Phinney Books and Madison Books, and the partner for the Bookfest for the last 4 years, I think. So for those of you who've been to the Bookfest before, um, you know what it's like. It's 2 hours in an extremely crowded room with about 20 authors and a whole bunch of book lovers walking around getting books signed, listening to readings, listening to music. And we are trying to recreate that as much as we can. So we will have readings. We're going to have 4 authors as advertised, reading from their latest books. We're going to have some music. We have a pretty crowded house. We have a lot of people signed up for this, which thank you very much for coming in. And we will have signed books. And so let me explain how the signed books work. We have created special commemorative book plates, and I have a sample here. This one is signed by Kim Baker, and it says Bookfest 2020 Holiday Bookfest 2020 stay-at-home edition. So I think it's almost 20 authors have signed book plates, and so when you order books, we will put the book plate in the book, and we will either have it for you to pick up at Phinney Books, or we'll ship it out to you. And the way to order the books, you can come into the store to do it, but if you visit the Phinney Books website, right at the top, there's a link that says Holiday Bookfest. And if you go there, you can purchase all the books that folks are reading from today, and then I think about 16 others. So let me actually just read the lineup of who else's books you can get. Kim Baker, author of The Water Bears; Kelly Brenner, Nature Obscura; Ben Clanton, Happy Narwhalidays; Kathleen Flanagan, Post-Romantic; David Guterson, Turnaround Time; Eric Liu, Become America; Rosie Mays, I Heart Soul Food; Brittany Morris, Slay; Steve Olson's The Apocalypse Factory; Tina Ontiveros' Rough House; Nancy Pearl and Jess Schwager's The Writer's Library; Susanna Ryan's Seattle Walk Report; Dominic Smith's The Electric Hotel; Garth Stein's The Cloven; and Molly Weisenberg's The Fixed Stars. And then we can get on to the authors who are with us today. First, I wanted to thank 2 people, Bill Thornis and Erica Bauermeister, who's going to be with us today, for doing so much of the organizing, the author wrangling, the book plate wrangling, and pretty much made this thing happen. So we're really happy that we can do it this year, and thanks to them especially. And so our program today, we're going to have 4 readers and 2 musicians in the middle. And the readers are going to read about 10 minutes each. And like the Holiday Bookfest, we're going to keep this pretty tight, so we won't have room for Q&A. We'll just be listening today. So again, thanks for coming. Our readers will be, we'll start with Erica Bauermeister, then Jess Walter, and then Jenny Shortridge and Matt Gani will hear their music, and then Kiera, Jane Buxton, and Donna Miscolta will read. So let's start with Erica, and I'll just introduce everybody when it's their turn. So Erica Bauermeister is the author of 2 fairly new books. Her latest novel, The Scent Keeper, came out in paperback this year and was a New York Times bestseller. But today she's going to read from her most recent book, House Lessons, a memoir of buying and rehabbing a house in Port Townsend, where she is broadcasting from today. And she's the author of 3 other novels, The School of Essential Ingredients, Joy for Beginners, and The Lost Art of Mixing, and the co-author of 500 Great Books for Women, and Let's Hear It for the Girls, 375 Great Books for Readers 2 to 14. And she has a PhD in literature from the University of Washington, as I do. She's a founding member of the Seattle 7 Writers, and as such has been the main organizing force for the Bookfest as long as I've been involved. So Erica, let's start things off. Thanks.
There, now you can hear me. That's better. Hi, everybody, and thank you to Tom. We would not be here if it wasn't for independent booksellers. So it has been great to be able to keep this tradition going. And please, everyone, support Tom and Phinney Books and Madison Books with your patronage this holiday season, because books are the best gift of all. Anyway, I'm going to be reading to you today from my newest book, which is House Lessons. This is the only memoir I have ever written and probably ever will write, but it was inspired by a house that we found in 2001. We were not looking for a house, we were looking for land, we were not looking for a project, and boy, howdy did we get one. So what I'm going to do is read to you from the inspection chapter. In keeping with our condensed version of the Holiday Bookfest, this is kind of the abridged edition of this chapter, but hopefully it will cover pretty much all the spots. So here we go. The inspection is often the lowest point in the house buying process. Real estate agents gear up for it, knowing their clients will have a dip in enthusiasm that can slide into extreme depression. As potential home buyers, we fall for a dream and then are forced to deal with the reality of things that we may not know how or cannot afford to fix. But a good inspector will give you both clarity and solutions, and then let you make up your own mind. It's not fun, but it's a critical point in the process, and paying attention now can help avoid much headache later. In his book, Renovating Old Houses, George Nash comments, "It's a commonplace that a marriage needs more than the first flush of passion to sustain itself. Likewise, even if it's love at first sight, you shouldn't buy an old house without conducting a thorough investigation into even its most uninviting corners." Nash's comparison of marriage to house inspections has always made me wonder how many weddings would go forward if couples went through a similar process before the big day, complete with a checklist of current and potential future defects. Foundation, rotten or not. Electricity, inadequate for the load or with plenty to spare. That sheltering roof, watertight or with leaks. When it comes to houses, Nash suggests a checklist for a house inspection that is a staggering 32 items long. The list includes, in order of decreasing importance and expense, everything from structural timbers to electrical systems, exterior trim paint, and bathroom fixtures. At the very bottom comes one last item. Does it feel right? By the time we finally got in the front door of the house in Port Townsend using a full shoulder police-style shove, it was already obvious there was a problem with the foundation. Nothing but a bad foundation can make a door stick in one corner like that. Inside, the piles appeared first. 5-foot-tall towers of boxes spread in a slowly disintegrating sprawl across the room, spilling old photos, hammers, pink Bibles, and patent leather shoes like birdseed from a split bag. A soot-covered fireplace dominated the south wall, a black wood stove thrusting out from the hearth like a squat, angry badger. Beside it rested a television the size of a small refrigerator. Next to it were 2 more televisions, each one about 12 years older than the last. Their packing boxes stood nearby. A 6-inch wide path led through the stacks to the dining room, revealing a glimpse of dirty red carpet. I yanked my sleeves over my hands. It was cold anyway, January, inside as well as out, which was probably what was keeping the smell to a manageable level. I pulled my turtleneck up over my nose and followed Ron, the inspector, into the next room. If the living room had been full, the dining room was packed, a carnival funhouse of objects. I'd never been anywhere like this before. I turned toward Ben. In the past, we had made a game of walking through open houses and making up stories about the people who lived there, playing detective in a casual kind of way. But this was different, disquieting, like a stranger's eyes meeting yours right before the bus hits. "Let's see the view," Ben said, muscling his way through the piles to the window. As he pulled back the heavy curtains, the outside flowed in. Victorian rooftops, the tips of trees, the water beyond. "Now that's a nice view," Ron said. "Remember that." He walked over to the swinging door on the west wall of the dining room. It seemed likely it would lead to the kitchen. Rob pushed the door open and, "Okay then," he said, closing the door firmly. When I raised my eyebrows in question, he just said, "Water," shaking his head. It takes remarkably little for water to gain access to a building and begin its work. You don't need a hurricane or a flood. All it takes is a missing roof shingle, peeling paint, a crack in a window frame. In the end, Ben and I would learn that the vast majority of our foundation problems could be traced back to a single downspout that had fallen off and never been replaced. One single downspout. In an odd way, marriages deal with many of the same maintenance issues as houses, and sometimes here too, the romance of maintenance is that it has none. Caretaking in a relationship is not flowers or date night. Necessary as these are, they are the equivalent of a new color painted on your walls. Delightful, but not structural. Structural is unloading the dishwasher when it's your partner's turn. It's learning about mushroom hunting or musical theater or rugby because your spouse loves it. It is talking about the best of your partner in public, not the worst. It's listening to stories we have heard 100 times before as if they are new. Often it is just listening, period. My father always washed the car by hand before he took my mother out on a date, even after they were married. He would say he wanted it clean for his girl. That's the part she remembered, not where they went or what they did. As John Gottman, who has studied countless married couples, will tell you, it is the presence of respect and an abiding willingness to support each other more than romance, which indicates whether a marriage will last. As I followed Ben up the stairs in the Port Townsend house, I was hoping we were doing well in the marriage department, but I worried sometimes that we threw ourselves at things like this because the excitement of a questionable project seemed more romantic, or at the very least more dramatic, than the caretaking of a relationship. It is perhaps why many marriages founder during a remodel. In the end, it isn't about needing a new kitchen or house. Sensing a lack in their relationship, some couples rush toward a project when in fact those voids might be better filled by words spoken to each other, by simple maintenance instead of a new addition. The jury was still out where Ben and I fell in that spectrum. The truth is, though, that many of the things I love best about Ben come out during our crazy projects. His gift of envisioning what isn't there, his reliable sense of humor, his artistic sensibilities, not to mention his MacGyver-like abilities. On one of our first dates, a trip into the Los Angeles mountains, he fixed my car's leaking gas line by rechewing an old piece of gum he found in the ashtray and plugging the hole until we could get to the gas station. The fact that I found this immensely appealing says much about our relationship. Maybe, probably, I worried too much, I told myself, so I crossed my fingers and headed for the second floor. The chaos we'd encountered on the main floor extended to the second. A clawfoot bathtub sat in the middle of the first bedroom, filled to overflowing with what looked like 40 years of clothes and board games and sports equipment. We tried to enter the other bedrooms, but the doors would only open enough for a peek inside. Peering in through a crack in the door, I saw more piles of clothes, a camping porta potty, a rifle. "Oh, man," I heard the inspector backing out of the bathroom. Come here," Ben called to me. "You've got to see this." He pointed to the shower. It was the soap I saw first. A delicate sculpture made of some 50 slivers of Irish Spring, a precarious tower of green and white rising up in the back corner. More work to stack them than to throw them away, and yet there they were, balancing. The faucet, Ben redirected my attention. I looked, and then looked again, puzzled. The handles were covered with yellow rubber kitchen gloves secured with rubber bands. They looked like Mickey Mouse hands waving at me from the tile wall. But that didn't make sense. I turned to Ben. "So he wouldn't get electrocuted," he said dryly. The plumbing was live. There were a couple potential explanations for this situation, but in any case, whoever was taking showers had preferred to risk death rather than fix the problem. It was kind of impressive when you thought about it. Except there was already too much to think about. Of the 30 plus items on Nash's inspection checklist, the best we could hope for was a neutral ranking on a few. The only thing that would garner full praise in this house was the view, and that didn't require the house. Ben and I shared a look. "Do you still want it?" He wasn't saying no. "Send me something," I said to the house in my mind. "Give me a reason." Because strangely enough, I still wanted one. Ron, the inspector, had found an entrance to the attic. When it was my turn, Ben held the ladder and I climbed up the rungs, expecting the worst. But as the beam from the flashlight roved over the darkened space, I could see the straight lines of rafters, the untouched interior of a roof soaring above me. Everything felt quiet, peaceful, as if this one portion of the house had somehow kept itself separate from all that happened below, as if in some way it was only itself. For the first time, I felt the house as it had once been. So there I stood, toes holding on to the rung of the ladder. I leaned forward into the still, perfect space of the attic, and in that moment, all the defects of the house mattered not at all. I went for the last item on Nash's list. Does it feel right? It's okay, I whispered into the dark. It's not your fault. We'll take care of you. Thank you.
Thanks, Erica. If we had more time, I would ask you for a house tour. After that.
It looks cleaner now.
Yeah, I just want to see the plumbing. All right, well, thank you. Next, we have Jess Walter, who is coming to us from Spokane. He's the author of 6 novels, including the National Book Award finalist The Zero, and most recently, the bestseller Beautiful Ruins. And his new book, and the first time I've been able to say since I've had our bookstore, there's a new Jess Walter book coming out, which is a pretty exciting thing to say, The Cold Millions. If Phinney Books had a bestseller list, I think it right now would be right behind Barack Obama, which is also a pretty good place to be. So Jess, welcome.
Thank you. This is The Cold Millions. Thank you so much. I guess it has been a while since I've had a book out. Bookstores have opened. My mailman kept telling me, it's been a while since you've had a book out. And I said, well, novels take a long time. You have to research them and write them and rewrite them. And he said, James Patterson's had 3 books out this year and they were all really great. And I was like, point mailman. So anyway, it's great to be out with the book. And thank you to Phinney Books and Madison Books. It's great. Such a lover of independent bookstores, and Seattle is such a great city, of course, for indie bookstores and for writers. So thank you, Seattle 7 writers, for having me. I'm glad my intransigence didn't keep you from asking. It's nice to be here. I'm just going to read from the beginning of The Cold Millions. It is a novel set 1909 in the Pacific Northwest. It follows 2 characters, Gregory and Ryan Dolan, Gig and Rye, they call one another, 2 itinerant workers, 2 hobos who get swept up in the labor movement of the early 1900s in the Northwest. I'm just going to start from the beginning so I don't have to set much up. This is Gig and Rye waking up on the day of the free speech riots, which are sort of the central action of the book. 1, they woke on a ball field. Bums, tramps, hobos, stiffs, 24 of them spread out on bedrolls and blankets in a narrow floodplain just below the skid, past taverns, tanners, and tents. Shotgun shacks hung like hounds' tongues over the Spokane River. Seasonal work over, they floated in from mines and farms and log camps, filled every flop and boarding house, slept in parks and alleys and the pavilions of traveling preachers, and on the night just past, this abandoned ball field, its infield littered with itinerants, vagrants, floaters, Americans. The sun was just beginning to edge the mountains when Rye Dolan sat up halfway down the first base line. He looked across a field of sleeping humps, his older brother Gig beside him, curled a few feet from the pitcher's mound. Rye turned back to watch the sunrise over the Selkirks, a smoky red gash where someone had set a fire to get a job fighting it. Last year, Rye might have paid to get a shovel on that blaze, but Gig had gone and joined the IWW, the union fighting the corrupt employment agents who charged $1 for job leads. Left untended, that same dollar could bring his older brother plenty of trouble, like last night. Pay in pocket, Gig Dolan liked to bounce from Dutch Jakes to Jimmy Durkin's until the money ran out. And while caring for Rye the past year and a half had tamed him, they were coming off 3 weeks apart. Rye picking up a late harvest near Rockford, Gig getting on a skid crew at a Springdale log camp. Fired for union agitating, Gig came back to booze it up with his East End labor pals and hawk day work at the city's vaudeville theaters. And it was there, among the freaks and jugglers, the variety houses and leg shows, that he happened to meet an actress, name of Ursula. Rye back in Spokane less than an hour before his brother was showing him a newspaper review of her show. And therein, Gig said, I'm at the Comique Theater last week, hauling lumber for the carpenter, when this red-haired vision emerges from her dressing room and says, well, who are you? And I say, why, the hero, of course. And she says, then you must get the damsel. And I say, every night, twice on Saturdays. She says, I'll bet that second performance really suffers. And I smile back and say, oh, I don't know. Goes on a bit longer, but what gets lost in zeal gets made up in familiarity. She went by the name Ursula the Great, the spokesman review referring to her as a spectacle of indecency and the last of 4 acts of increasing depravity. Gig talked Rye into using their sock money on a shared public bath, older brother taking the suitors hot, Rye settling for warm flotsam, and they got haircuts and nickel shaves, though a scrape was hardly needed on Rye's baby face. And instead of boiling clothes over a cook fire, they paid for proper clean-and-folds in the Chinese Quarter. All gentlemened up, they got 50-cent seats at the Comique and settled in for some mild depravity. Blind accordion player, Bavarian juggler, wrestling match between armless and legless men, always bet legs. Until the curtain split for the finale, depravity number 4, and the smoky stage lights revealed the source of Gig's infatuation. Rye wondering what pinch-hearted critic came up with a word like depraved upon first glimpsing the flame-haired beauty who strode into the lights in front of a big iron cage. For inside was a full-grown cougar, pacing and snarling while the band played a hurdy-gurdy and the big cat stalked and Ursula danced around it, singing a few numbers and slow stripping to nothing but a corset and stockings, kicking those long legs higher and higher, leaning her backside against the cage until all went black and the spotlight came up and the whole theater held its breath as Ursula unlatched the cage door and the big cat lowered its head, hissed and spat, and brave Ursula ambled in as if going to her pantry for butter, closed the cage door behind her and serenaded the beast, holding an ungodly high note as she ripped off the corset, and oh, the flash of flesh, of narrow waist and pale back, and the fury of that mountain lion as it made to pounce at her bare breasts, which Rye could only imagine as she was facing away. And that was when Ursula tossed the corset at the cat, who tore into it in lieu of her fair skin, and drowned out by cheers and whistles, she took a silk robe from the back of the cage, slipped it on, tied the belt, and still singing over the roar of cat and crowd, Ursula the Great walked out of that cage in one lovely piece. Rye had to agree. This Ursula was the real thing. Made the blind accordion player seem like a blind accordion player. Afterward, Rye ran the aisles for leftover food, but Gig was smitten, and when Gig was smitten by cause or by woman, there was no sense in him, and he dragged them out of that warm theater and down the alley to the stage door. A thick doorman was manning the post, and even with the brothers' freshly shaved faces and laundered shirts, he wasn't about to let such worn boots in to see the talent. Gig pleaded, but the doorman explained Ursula was otherwise engaged, and for 2 bits he said how, entertaining a gentleman, and for 2 bits more who, a wealthy mining man named Lemuel Brand. The Dolans had been sharked by enough of Lem Brand's operations to know it didn't matter how charming and handsome Gig was. A skid rower like him was no match for a man of means like Brand. So they started back up the alley, Rye saying, I hope the cougar wins next time, when a call came from the stage door, Gregory, and Ursula, still in the robe, emerged into flickering gaslight. Gregory, she called again, like she hadn't hit the note the first time, and he ran down the alley to her. Gig listened as Miss Great explained, shoving his hands in his trouser pockets at the bad news, Ursula touching his chest, Gig nodding, turning, and leaving her at the stage door, returning to Rye at the end of the alley. She watched him go, hand on heart, Gig refusing her the satisfaction of looking back. Well, she swears she won't bed the man, said Gig, but he owns the theater, so. And with no words on the other side of that so, they ventured back into the street to salve Gig's wounded soul. Thank you. Happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for buying books and supporting writers. And we'll see you when this is all over, I hope.
Thanks, Jess. I hope everyone noticed right behind Jess's shoulder that he, like Phinney Books, has a shelf of NYRB classics. Excellent taste in a writer. All right, so now we're time for our musical interlude. So folks who have been to previous book fests know that one of the featured elements were the rejections. And two of their members are here today. Jenny Shortridge, one of the other founders of the Seattle Seven Writers, and her husband Matt, and they're going to talk about the music we're going to hear.
Hey, thanks a lot, Tom. And thanks everybody who put on this great event. We were part of a performance recently for Bushwick Book Club of Seattle. And if you're familiar with them, you know that they put on shows where all musicians read one book and then each write a song about it. And these shows are fantastic. So two things I want you to remember is Bushwick Book Club Seattle is a wonderful organization. They have events coming up that you can now just live stream just like this. And you can just go to their website to find what those are, the bushwickbookclubseattle.com. And next Saturday, they're having a show where they're featuring Hugo House authors, and that should be really fantastic. And in January, the Prince memoir. So I think that'll be really fantastic. Also, they take donations to do their good work, and they also do programs in schools for kids. So that's really where the donations go. So again, if you go to their website, please make a little donation if you can and help them out right now. So the book that we did the song about last month, actually in November, was Become America by Erica Bauermeister. It's actually Become America, Civic Sermons on Love, Responsibility, and Democracy. So it was the perfect book for November. And it's written by the founder of Civic University and Civic Saturdays that you'll see held, several have been in Seattle. It's a wonderful book for anyone who wants to be a citizen of this country and believes in democracy. So we hope you'll read it. And it's one of the books that Tom mentioned they have signed, so that's cool. And here's the song that Matt and I wrote about the book after reading it. And we're going to show you a video of the performance that we did for Bushwick. After a few little
Oh my goodness.
technicalities.
Really?
We might come back to it. Sorry about this.
Okay, hopefully that works.
Sorry.
There you go. I swear, it's really going to happen. No, it's not going to happen.
It's denying us.
Here you go.
Here's an arrow. Sorry, you guys. Here you go.
Oh, say, can you show me to the land of the free and the home of the brave in the dawn's early light? We're tired and lonely and some cannot breathe, and we question the meaning of life and never leave. What is freedom? It ain't free. It don't free us from our responsibility. From Charlotte to Portland, bombs bursting in air. Kenosha and Nashville, and the rockets' red glare. We took to the streets in South Bend and D.C., and Phoenix and Dallas and Montgomery. What is freedom? It ain't free. It don't free us from voices, yearning to breathe free. Where is our dreamland, shining sea to sea? Oh, hey, let me show you my American dream. In the twilight's last gleaming and all through the night, we pledge our commitment and answer the call. With malice to none and justice for all. What is freedom? It ain't free. It don't free us from our responsibility. In the perilous night we can only see where we shine the light of liberty. What is freedom? It ain't free. It don't free us from our responsibility. In the perilous night we will only be free. Where we sing the harmonies of liberty. Let us sing the harmonies of liberty.
There you go.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Jenny and Matt, and thanks for navigating the quirks of Zoom to bring us that. I noticed that Bill Thorness posted a link to Bushwick in the Q&A if anybody wants to click on that. And I forgot to mention earlier, a portion of the proceeds of the Bookfest always go to a nonprofit, and this year Bushwick is our nonprofit, so some of their book sales will go towards them. Thanks, guys. And next we have Kiera Jane Buxton, who has written one novel, but it has she may have written more, but she's published one novel, but it's gathered more than its share of sales and acclaim already. Hollow Kingdom, which gives us a crow's eye view of the apocalypse in Seattle, and which came out in paperback this year, appeared on many Best of 2019 lists, and was a finalist for the Washington State Book Award. Kiera is coming to us from Linwood, where you may or may not hear the sound of leaf blowers in the background. Take it away, Kiera.
Thank you, Tom, and also thank you to Bill and Erica for putting together this event. I have done Holiday Bookfest and shopped there in years past, and hoped and dreamed that one day I'd get to be a part of it, and here we are. So I'm just so excited. I am going to read a little chapter from Hollow Kingdom. As Tom said, it's narrated by a crow. However, I'm going to take a chance and do something new and read from the perspective of a cat, because there's these sort of interstitial chapters throughout that are narrated by other animals. So I'm going for the cat today, which is a little risky. For this to make sense, this is this cat, Genghis cat, who lives in Capitol Hill, and his owners, something has happened to not only his two owners, but to humanity. I'm going to put, it's an apocalyptic event, I'm going to put the word zombie in your mind. And there's also been some escaped zoo animals from the Woodland Park Zoo. So this is a cat trying to figure all this out. And I should preface this too, since it's coming from the perspective of a cat, there are some swears. So if you're sensitive to the swear words, this might be a good time to just mute me for a minute. So here we go. Genghis Cat, a home in Capitol Hill, Seattle, Washington, USA. There has been a change in the order of things that I can't quite put my claw on. My observations. 1, it's quieter out there. This makes the game more interesting. 2, there are no sprinting cars to compete with over squirrels. 3, there's a lot more to hunt. 4, there are plenty more hunters to fight it for, hunters of all kinds. 5, there's decidedly less cheese available. Perhaps it's due to a shift in the lunar light, a cosmic spell, or because I've finally mastered my innate feline sorcery. One thing that hasn't changed, my mediocre servants still never seem to leave the home. I believe, if it's at all possible, that they have devolved. According to my calculations, they now spend 186% of their time growling at the wall. But I've always known them to be a lower life form, no better than slug-tongued, alopecia-stricken bears with epically shitty balance. They are eggs on legs with no discernible senses and the reflexes of a bugle stuffed with brine shrimp. I have watched with my unparalleled vision and laser pointer focus as my mediocre servants jab at the wall repeatedly with their fingers, or what's left of them, up to down, up to down. Both are overdue for a thorough grooming, which their own mothers wouldn't attempt at this point. Today, wait, hold everything while I groom my inner thigh. Today, my mediocre servants, the girl one with the long mane and the girl one with all the skin drawings, who both liked to stay at home and talk about chemistry science until the coffee ran out, smell like a microwaved litter box. No longer do they turn on their silver lap boxes, which is characteristically selfish of them because it is a classically renowned nap location. The warm spots, silver lap box, top of tall cold food house, winter bed blanket, top of their sacred wine fridge, mediocre servant's thighs while she's sitting on the white seat that roars, have been confiscated. They appear to be staging some sort of feeble protest by refusing to replenish my dehydrated niblet stash. I have conducted experiments using techniques that used to be fairly effective, knocking over the French press, unraveling their shoddy knitting, chewing the covers of every book in the library, shitting on pillows, shredding the couch, eating all the Ethernet snakes, and pissing all over bed blanket. But they seem to no longer be concerned. Admittedly, I'm impressed. I respect the negligible number of shits currently being given. Case in point, one of my mediocre servants left her arm in the living room, which I believe speaks to their general ineptitude. I played with it momentarily, but found its pungency off-putting and resumed licking my anus. My instincts were always right. They were never to be fully trusted. For a while, I persisted with this ill-fated relationship by bringing them mice, moles, rats, sparrows, finches, robins, wrens, chickadees, and something new and exciting, a tuxedo-wearing bastard that called itself a Humboldt penguin before I assassinated it. I presented these offerings to them, as always, to remind them of their inadequacy and rub my hunting prowess in their faces, those dildo-nosed potatoes. But I'm not an unreasonable creature. I also share my offerings to ensure the thighs of my mediocre servants are adequately padded for my sitting pleasure. When I offered up the black and white eggplant of a bird, which was heavy as fuck, by the way, the mediocre servant with the skin drawings tried to bite me. Ochre, nubby fangs, narrowly missing my tail. I did what was necessary. I bit her back, severing a finger. Then I attempted to bury it in the carpet by covering it up like a rogue turd. I will no longer bring them offerings, exotic or otherwise. I will not grace them with my presence. Should have known it was all over when they stopped summoning the requisite number of boxes from the Amazon for me to cavort in. No, I have made my decision to leave the home. It is true that I shall miss the toasty laps and the dehydrated fish blobs and ambushing their bulbous toes under the bed blanket and how they used to worship me. Most especially, I will miss the cheese. But not as much as they will miss me. I am incredible. So, once I had systematically eaten all the contents of aquarium, I left through the flap of cat to the grate outside, never to return to the home. Besides, I'd yarfed on every single inch of the place. There was nothing more to decorate. Before I left, I made sure I'd unrolled all the toilet paper. Life on the outside is unpredictable, requiring vigilance and innate brilliance, both qualities I possess in numbers higher than I can count. I hunt and prowl and observe and fuck with shit. Also, my collection is growing. So far, I have infiltrated 400 homes and pillaged every sock I can find. I cannot explain my fascination with these delightful foot blankets. I can only tell you that it pleases me to carry them around while yowling like my fur is on fire. Something of interest. Yesterday, I was minding my own highly important business around one of my territories, my newly acquired mosque. It's enormous and gold and sublimely spiritual, with rainbow windows that let those rascally little beams in. I was busy chasing a light beam that had no business running up my damn wall when out of nowhere, this asshole walks in to my mosque. My urine smells stronger than hydrofluoric acid. I don't know how my territory could be made any clearer. Who doesn't respect boundaries like that? You know who? A giant piliferous orange. That's who. He just waltzes in like some big shot. I let out a viperous hiss, warning him that I collect femur bones. He seemed startled. And then I asked him what the fuck he was, because he didn't seem like a local Seattleite. And he said he was looking for his home. And then I just about had it with this mouthy tool running off his mouth, so I chased him out of my mosque. I was all talon and bite. I was a tricksy light beam of silver and brown and black, the power of the sun in motion, if it were more kick-ass. He got the message all right. He loped off, not sure how to comprehend such an omnipotent ninja. But I worry he'll be back, because he caught a glimpse of my sock collection, or perhaps the eggs from the nest raids I have pillaged, and I am marginally concerned that he'll plan an ambush. It is a legitimate worry since he's the size of a wine fridge. I can't complain. I'm living the good life. I've hunted and pillaged and fathered 130 kittens, that I know of, with 26 different mousers, and none of this shit interferes with my 16 hours of daily sleep. You can fuck off now. I have nothing more to say to you. Thank you, everybody. Happy holidays.
Thanks, Kiera. I did not know that cats rolled their R's, but somehow it's perfectly fitting. Thank you. All right, so last we have Donna Miscolta. Donna is a friend of Phinney Books. She's read at our little store. She has been to the Holiday Bookfest before as an author. Her new book, Living Color, Angie Rubio Stories, is her third book. It's new this fall from Jaded Ibis Press. Like her previous book, Hola and Goodbye, which won the Doris Backwin Award and an International Latino Book Award, is a book of linked stories that spans decades. In this case, the California childhood of Angie Rubio, as she learns the strengths and sensibilities of a writer. Welcome back, Donna.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to Phinney Books. Thank you, Bill and Erica. And whose idea was it for me to follow Kiera? That was fantastic, Kiera. That was wonderful. So I'm going to read from this collection of stories about the life lessons a young girl learns as she progresses through school. And these are lessons about power or the lack of power, about belonging and finding a place in the world. And I'm reading from the story called First Confession. You are at the age of reason, Sister said, ready to understand the mystery of transubstantiation. She cued them with her ruler. Transubstantiation, the children repeated. Andrew spoke it softly, enjoying the roominess of the word, its multiple mysterious syllables that would teach her how to be good. They were in second grade, preparing for their first communion. They were 7 years old. It was catechism hour, and Sister Patrick Marie swept up and down the aisles of the classroom, impossibly quiet in her heavy black shoes and voluminous black drapes. She called out questions, and Angie mouthed the words inside the murmurings of the other children. Who made me? God made me. Then Father Mulligan, who had the habit of dropping in without warning, stood at the door, and the children scrambled to attention beside their desks and greeted him. But they were not in unison. Their voices were low, their syllables staggered, and everything sounded like scuffling feet. Sister Patrick gave a closed-mouthed smile to Father with one side of her face and scowled at the children with the other side. They had failed her in front of Father. Sister signaled for them to atone by reciting more of their catechism, which they delivered in the perfect sing-song of their playground chants. Where is God? God is everywhere. Father asked them to pray for John F. Kennedy, who was running for President of the United States. They all obeyed fervently, lifting their brown faces heavenward, since everyone knew that if Nixon became president, he would make them go to school on Saturdays, and that was un-American. Before Father left, he told them to make room on their chairs for the guardian angel, who was always at their side. They all scooted to the edge of their narrow wooden seats as they resumed their lesson. Angie's thigh and shoulders soon ached from scrunching herself up. She didn't dare move, though. With Sister Patrick patrolling the aisles and Father Mulligan making surprise visits, her guardian angel taking up part of her desk space, and God everywhere, Angie was surrounded and under watch. It was the same at home, which was not really their home. They were staying with her grandparents. It was the home where their mother, Delia, grew up, along with her sister Nelda. They had shared a bedroom and fought and told each other secrets. Now the three Rubio sisters shared a room with Nelda, who said and did surprising things. Sometimes, after taking off her bra and before slipping on her nightgown, she would hold one of her breasts in her hand and say, "Want some teta?" And she would laugh a wicked, cackling laugh. Her son was little Eddie, even though there seemed to be no big Eddie from whom to distinguish him. Sister Patrick stood at the front of the classroom, grimmer than usual, and with a disconcerting appearance of a tear in one eye, its glisten magnified by her glasses. Our beloved Sister Paulina has taken ill. Some of the girls started crying. Angie felt a pang inside her ribcage, as if a rock had lodged there, and felt her face go hot at the thought she had recently had about Sister Paulina. Since she had seen Melda's breasts, Angie had wondered about her mother's, even her grandmother's. At school, she had wondered about the nuns. Did they have them? But really, it was Sister Paul she'd been curious about. Kind Sister Paul with her young movie star face that her mother said was the image of Elizabeth Taylor. We must all pray for her, Sister Patrick said. Angie closed her eyes and imagined Sister Paul in her bed beneath a blanket pulled to her chin, her head and body encased in the big black robes of her habit, her face pale and sweaty. Angie concentrated so hard on the image, she could summon no words of prayer. Sister Patrick ended the silence with a loud amen, and Angie held herself rigid. certain that Sister could read her thoughts or know her lack of prayer. Sister told them to take out a sheet of paper. You will each write Sister Paulina a heartfelt get well letter. Sister Patrick lay her hand over her heart to demonstrate the expected source of their words. Angie copied Sister Patrick's gesture, her fingers hanging off her left collarbone. She felt her heart thump into the corner of her palm. Angie listened to other people's conversations a lot, and because she lived in a house with so many people and 2 TVs, she had a lot of conversations to listen to, and therefore, lots of words and sentences hovering in the spaces of her brain. She was a careful writer, both in forming her letters and her thoughts, even if not all of them were exactly her own. Dear Sister Paulina, during this time of Cold War in the world, you have always been a breath of fresh air. You are the favorite of girls and boys, and for those who think young. My faith that you will get well soon keeps me going strong. Angie reread her words. She didn't think nuns watched TV, so was pretty sure that Sister Paul wouldn't recognize the slogans from the Pepsi, Slinky, and Sugar Crisp commercials. It was a pretty good letter, she thought, but not special. Sister Patrick was telling them to finish up their letter soon, so Angie wrote quickly, when you come back, you will have a big surprise. Sincerely, Angie Rubio. Angie didn't know what made her write such a thing. As Sister Patrick collected their letters, she wondered what exactly she had meant by that. What surprise could she, Angie, possibly invent? She watched Sister stack the letters on the corner of her desk, and Angie felt relieved to see that her letter blended in with the many. The next day, when she came in from recess, there was a familiar sheet of paper on her desk. It was her own letter to Sister Paulina. She panicked at the sight of her words that were exposed for all to see. She looked up to see Sister Patrick, who was making a gesture at her, turning her open palm to face down. And finally, Angie understood to flip over the letter. On the back was a letter from Sister Paul. Dear Angie, thank you for such a lovely letter. It cheered me up greatly. I look forward to the day when I can return to the classroom. Yours, Sister Paulina. No one else had received a letter from Sister Paul, but then probably no one else had promised her a big surprise. Angie knew Sister Patrick had read her letter, and she knew Sister Patrick had read the response from Sister Paul. It was a terrible thing to know. Before, Angie had not thought to question the absence of a father for little Eddie or a husband for Aunt Nelda. But now that she was 7, these things occurred to her, and she formed her own conclusions. That you didn't have to be married to have children. That somehow just being a grown-up caused you to have a child. Of course, this conclusion was soundly refuted by Eva. It doesn't just happen automatically, she snorted. There has to be a kiss, and there's a seed in the kiss, and the woman swallows it, and it grows into a baby in her belly. Who kissed Aunt Nelda? Angie wanted to know. She said it out loud. Who kissed you and gave you a baby, Aunt Nelda? Nelda looked stunned, and her lashes batted wildly. It made them all go silent. I'm telling Mama, Letty said, and she slid from the bed and backed out of the room like the policeman on TV. Within seconds, their mother stalked into the room with Letty trailing behind. What's going on here? Angie wanted to know who kissed Aunt Nelda and gave her a baby, Eva said. Their mother pursed her lips and folded her arms. Nelda had a husband, but he died. She looked sternly at Angie as if she might have been responsible for killing him. Now no more discussion, her mother said, and Angie knew she was lying. Angie felt the house filling up with her family's biting words and harsh silence. Her father was tired of being a sailor and tired of living in someone else's house. Her mother said to him that at least he wasn't the mother day in and day out to all these kids. At least he got to leave the house to go to work. Nelda was still looking tragic after Angie asked who kissed her, and Angie was still worried about the big surprise she had promised Sister Paulina. The grown-ups decided a drive to Marineland to see the dolphins dance and the seals play polo would make them all smile. But they would have to get an early start and miss church. But I'm not supposed to miss church when I'm studying for my first communion, Angie reminded them. Do you want to go to Marineland or not? Her mother asked. On Monday, Sister Patrick makes us stand up and say why we didn't go to church. Ay, chica, just don't stand up, Nelda said, rolling her eyes. Angie didn't want to stand up, but she knew she wouldn't have a choice. On Monday morning, Sister Patrick stood at the front of the room and asked which of them had failed to attend church on Sunday. Those who stood had to explain what had been more important than God. Angie stood bravely to face the humiliation. She stood partly out of her sense that Sister Patrick, Father Mulligan, her guardian angel, and God already knew of her absence from church, but partly because she felt a little heroic, and she was disappointed that the bruise on her forehead that had seemed so robustly purple the previous day was already fading. We were in a car accident, Angie said, and she couldn't help raising her hand to her forehead where the bump was, or used to be. Sister Patrick frowned, and though it might have been concern, suspicion was also a possibility. My mother had stitches, Angie said. Well, Sister said, thank God you were all safe. It was a command. Angie bowed her head, wanted to thank God instead for saving her from the wrath of Sister Patrick. During silent reading time, when 30 sets of lips were moving soundlessly, including Angie's, even as her mind wandered to the problem of inventing a big surprise for Sister Paulina, Sister Patrick called Angie to her desk. Angie, shaking with guilt about her inattention to her reading, made her way slowly to Sister Patrick, sitting large as a monument at the front of the room. Yes, Sister Patrick, she whispered, aware that many of the lips in the room had ceased moving. Angie, Sister Patrick said in her low, deep voice, what is this big surprise you have in store for Sister Paul? Angie could not swallow, could not force words from her throat. She shrugged, not quite meeting Sister Patrick's small gray eyes behind the rimless glasses. Do you mean to say that what you wrote is not quite true? Angie coughed to test her vocal cords. I wanted it to be true. I meant for it to be true. You know that's not the same thing. There was a long pause during which Angie considered running from the room. Some of the other students had stopped pretending to read and were watching the scene before them. What made you write such a thing? Sister Patrick asked. Angie heard Sister's voice, trying to be kind, but saw that her eyes were not. Angie's impulse to flee left her. She stood rooted and faced Sister's unfriendly gaze. I wanted to make her happy because I love her. Angie wasn't at all sure that was true. She only knew that she didn't love Sister Patrick, whose pursed lips parted with a slight quiver. That will do. Please sit down now. Sister Patrick stood up. And now for phonics. After their phonics lesson, in which they all did poorly since no one understood what phonics meant, and Sister Patrick's chalky jowls spasmed with displeasure at their failings, she instructed them all to put their heads face down on their desks. They did this whenever they played Heads Up, 7 Up on rainy days, but today it wasn't raining. Heads down, no peeking, Sister Patrick said. Angie watched little orange blobs float beside her closed eyelids. She could hear the restlessness of the children around her, the chafing of thighs, the skimming of saddle shoes against linoleum, the friction of sweater sleeves against grainy desktops. Angie was about to lift her eyes for a tiny peek when she felt a hand covering her head, guiding it back to its down position, holding it there, finally letting go, and the severe whisper of black moving past. Heads down, no peeking, Sister repeated. Her voice came from the front of the room again, and it hovered over their bowed heads as she gave her next instructions. If you hate me, raise your hand. There was a moment when the restlessness ceased, like the moment after a door slams and smothers everything to a hush when no one breathes. Then the fidgeting began again, the chafing thighs, shuffling shoes, rasping woolly sweaters. But Angie held herself still, her legs, her arms, especially her arms. It was hot with her face pressed against her desk. It was hard to breathe. Her head pounded with voices. It's a sin to hate. It's a sin to lie. Raise your hand if you hate me. It was a single voice, and then it was a chorus. And though her eyes were closed and her head was down, and she could see nothing except tiny orange blots, couldn't they all see her? Sister Patrick, Father Mulligan, her guardian angel, God. Angie needed air. She lifted her face, took a deep breath, and raised both hands high in surrender. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Donna. Thanks, everybody. I was, as the bookseller at the Bookfest, one thing I always miss out on is the author readings because I'm busy selling books. So the one silver lining of the virtual Bookfest is I got to hear the readings. So thank you for the pleasure of listening to your books. Thanks for joining us on screen. And then a reminder to everyone to donate to the Bushwick Book Club and visit the Phinney Books website if you want to buy signed copies of all these folks' books and the many others who have been kind enough to sign some book plates for us. So thanks. See you again in person, I hope, next year. And thanks for joining us this time. Thanks, everybody.